another video with University of Cincinnati political science professor George Bishop, who is someone who's spent a long career studying how pollsters ask questions. Readers will know that I've talked about the sort of famous work he did with asking about fictional issues and finding the pseudo-opinions that Americans sometimes report. You presented a paper here, but I kind of want to talk more generally about the kind of work you normally do. So let's take an issue, immigration. Right now, a lot of national surveys are asking Americans their opinion about the Arizona immigration bill.
Yes.
Do you see shortcomings in the approaches that we're taking?
Well, I see many of the same patterns recurring, whether it's immigration law, health care reform, pick your topic. I see a lot of questions asked to people, well-intentioned, people do the media polls, others I think are all good professionals doing the best work they can, but they're also in the business of producing stories. And it's probably not a very good story to keep telling people, for example, that, well, if you give people a chance to say they haven't thought about the issue, and you find 30, 40, 50% of the people who do that in a poll, then you kept reporting that week in and week out about the issues that are being discussed inside the Beltway or wherever. Doesn't make good copies, they might say, to keep doing. So we might ask you after a while, well, why do you continue to ask these questions if such high percentage of people say they haven't thought about it or don't have an opinion on it? And the immigration law is a good example. I just recently started looking at some of these polls, and some organizations, I think Pew is one of them, I may have it wrong, and CBS, go ahead and say, they start the questions about the Arizona immigration law with a phrase like, as you may know, or from all the discussion you've heard, and they presume that the person knows something about it, has paid some attention to it. And then you have other polls, I think Fox and Opinion Research did one, where they did take the trouble to say to people, well, do you favor oppose this immigration law in Arizona, or haven't you heard much about it, or haven't you thought about it? They found over 40% of the people had not even thought about the issue. So that tells me the big story is there's a sizable plurality of the American public that's really up for grabs yet. They really haven't made their minds up.
So what kind of question do you think would be most useful to ask a random sample of Americans about immigration?
Well, actually the question that I've advocated was something that George Gallup advocated back in the 1940s. He thought the first thing you ought to do was determine people's awareness. And so take Arizona immigration law as an example. Like Fox and a couple others that have asked the question, have you heard or read about this? Do you have an opinion about it? That's what Gallup would say. Now that's one, that just measures awareness. But even if people say, yes, I've heard about it, sometimes it's easy to bluff and just say yes. I would then take the trouble to say, well, can you tell me, ma'am or sir, a little bit more about what exactly you've heard about the Arizona immigration? I think that ought to be.
So you would want to ask us a more open-ended question.
Yes, I think that ought to be that first stage of opinion polling. And I know this costs money.
Right.
And open-ended responses are hard to code. They're messy, and there are all those disincentives. But if I have the resources, phase one of approaching that particular, or healthcare, or pick your topic, would be: have you heard or read something about it? And if yes, what exactly? Let me know. I've heard this and that. Anything else you've heard? That then would become the material for formulating questions in a subsequent phase. So it would be a more intensive process of studying public opinion. But that's the very kind of thing that Gallup advocated. He also said, well, even if you do what I'm advocating, have you heard or read about it? Do you know much about it? What are some of the arguments in favor of the law? What are some arguments against it?
Right.
He'd go on and say, well, present him the proposition anyway. Say, here was what it is, and now do you favor or oppose it now that I've described it to you? And Gallup would say, now, well, guess what? You can now analyze informed public opinion and uninformed public opinion, and that's not what we're doing.
Right. What about the other aspects of immigration? I mean, people may not know enough, may not feel they know enough about the Arizona law to express an opinion about it, but they probably have attitudes about immigration, illegal immigration, what the government's doing about it.
Well, they may have attitudes. I suspect if we carefully question them, we'd find they have fears. And they have emotions and fears revolving around this topic, some of which may be quite legitimate. If you're living along the border, the people have real concerns. They see these things on a day-to-day basis. I think it's worth finding out what those fears are. Do they have well-formed attitudes about it? Some do. There's always some subset of the public that's thought about it and pays attention, the political class, and yes. But large numbers of people, I think, are more fearful and concerned. They're not sure where they should be. They probably feel something should be done about it. So yes, there's something there. I'm not saying there's nothing. But I think if I looked at the Pew poll, I may be wrong about this. They actually describe provisions of the Arizona law that I'm not sure even accurate in the way they posed it in the questions. I'd have to look at the content of the law. So I think immigration, in a sense, is a real concern for Americans. I think they have fears. They have, feel the government should do something, but I don't know what more there is beyond that.
Right. I'm afraid we could. I've just warmed you up, and we could talk for an hour, but
Yes,
I'm gonna let our internet audience off the hook. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.